Hello, all you wonderful folks out there in internet land. It's Bobby today for I believe is going to be two videos here about where to find inspiration for campaign ideas for your Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Obviously, this assumes you're not using pre-made campaigns because, well, you don't need any inspiration. It's all right there for you. Also, I'm going to have to apologize for the solid white background we've been using. We haven't yet figured out whose house is going to be remodeled with a bunch of LED lights and all kinds of action figures and everything that look like every other YouTube channel just yet. So once we do, though, you'll see it. So anyway, story ideas. So this is going to be the general outline, and the hopeful second video is going to be some more specific examples of places you might not think to look offhand. So, as a general idea, broadly speaking, look everywhere. I know that's not at all helpful, but trust me, you will find inspiration in places you don't anticipate. So just keep an open mind as you are watching TV shows, even the evening news. Maybe you're going to decide to do a political thriller type campaign and want to use modern events that I'm not at all going to talk about on here. Or maybe you want to use some historical moment, that you can find inspiration all over TV. Also, the newspaper for similar things. But presumably you want something a little more fantastic, in which case you're going to want to look beyond the real world, even though the real world tends to beat fiction in terms of unbelievability any given day. So the places you're going to want to look, in my opinion, the number one place to look is movies. Now, novels will give you all kinds of ideas. Novels also take longer to read than movies take to watch. So, depending on what kind of time crunch you're under, I'd stick with movies. Similar to TV shows. TV shows can probably provide you with all kinds of ideas. You would go and throw out a recommendation right here and now. Watch all of Game of Thrones. Yeah, the last season kind of takes a dive, but there's still good ideas there. And don't just copy it, pick some of the ideas and run with them. I mean, obviously, about to be some spoilers here, so here goes. But, like, for instance, there's a kingdom well, it's not a kingdom, it's the Wildlands in the north of a 700-foot tall ice wall. Just that can be the genesis of a whole campaign for you. That's even before you get into the ice zombies, which can be a whole other campaign if you wanted it to be. The actual Game of Thrones that the setting is named for could be a whole campaign unto itself. Any one of the countries mentioned in the series has enough information in the series to get the beginnings of a campaign going for it. So, not just the series itself as a whole, but it is made up of all kinds of potential ideas. So, if you're going to watch a TV series, that's the one to watch. Fair warning, it is graphically violent and not for children at all. Your campaign doesn't have to follow that, obviously, but just fair warning. But beyond that, in my opinion, movies have an advantage over TV shows primarily in that a movie is either a singular story or at most it's set up as something like a trilogy, but it has a set beginning, middle, and end. You know there will be an end to it. A TV series, they're just not produced that way. Very few of them are. Very few have a set, hey, this is going to take X number of seasons, so let's do it. They're more like, hey, we made enough money this season to make another season, so they have to end each season on a cliffhanger in the hopes that the next season actually gets picked up. And that's terrible for your campaign writing if you want to have a complete campaign idea. Now, if you want to have a series of adventures instead, then sure, a TV show will work just fine. Maybe watch something like Hercules or Xena from the 90s. They're quite entertaining, somewhat topical, because they involve magic and gods and everything of that nature. Uh, Very farcical, but, you know, they're entertaining. Some of Sam Raimi's early stuff. And you'll see all kinds of people that you'll see nowadays, like Carl Urban occasionally. So, anyway, I would stick with movies, is my overarching point here. And again, if you have the time, novels are better because there's more depth to them. There's the allowance for more subplots, and again, any halfway decently written novel does subplots could be inspiration for your campaign to just take off with. So that's where I would primarily focus my efforts. Then another idea I would go with is, if you haven't already, get a hold of a copy of the Monster Manual and read the entries, especially for monsters you don't recognize as being typical fantasy monsters like goblins and orcs. You probably already know how they go because you probably watched Lord of the Rings. They're not terribly different from Lord of the Rings. So you need to look at entries for things like the Mind Flayer, for instance, because they have an incredibly alien culture. They're all about subversion, mind control. I mean, just their entry could set you down a path for an entire campaign just dealing with them. And there are all kinds of other monsters like that. So definitely read through and definitely look at things that you wouldn't think of. If you come across something you're like, hey, what's this? Read the entry for it. And for some of them, you might have to get a hold of older edition material that went more in depth with what they do, because I'm talking mainly for 5th edition because of when this is being recorded. But some of the older editions went more in depth with certain creatures. Some of them wrote whole books on them, like the dragons in the 3.5 and 4th edition. I don't know about 1st and 2nd, sorry. Both have a Draconomicon book that goes seriously in depth for each of the dragons, the primary chromatic and metallic dragons anyway. So anyway, so there's the Draconomicon. Like the Mind Flayer specifically in 3.5, there's a book called Lords of Madness, which is all about creatures like this from the Far Realm, and it can give you all kinds of ideas. And don't, just in general, don't be afraid to explore material from the older editions. The new edition is still, even though it's produced a lot of material, in my opinion, it hasn't produced a lot of material like that goes in depth. It's produced a lot of adventures, which is a major change from 3.5, where 3.5 produced a lot of material and not nearly as many adventures. Whereas now they're focusing more on adventures because it seems to be what people want, I guess. I don't know. I don't do market research for Witches of the Coast. So, just, look and see what's already there, and you can build a campaign off that, and you might get lucky and already find maps of the layers for the creatures, more in-depth look at their habits, things like that, so definitely be mindful of that. Also, all these ideas, you don't have to look at any one source and be like, that's what my campaign is going to be from. You don't have to look at, let's take Lord of the Rings. Now, I don't advise you copy Lord of the Rings because, one, your players will know. Number two, the bestiary, it's not bestiary, it's bestiary, I found that out the other day, is very, very slim. It's essentially orcs, goblins, ringwraiths, and Sauron. I'm sure there's some other things in there somewhere. If you copy the movies, there's undead things that don't exist in the book, but, go for the book, it's better. But you don't have time to read that because I said go for movies, but these are 5.5 hour long movies, so maybe you do have time to read the book. I don't know. But anyway, there could be a part of that plot that you see that you're saying, hey, this would help me get from point A to point C for my adventure that I have kind of charted out. So you don't have to use the entire storyline. You can just use a part of it. Or you can use the entire storyline if it's short to make it a part of a larger storyline. Like, for instance, in another video, I mentioned that I am presently using part of the movie Ladyhawke. Well, it's eventually going to tie into some other things from another movie called The Color Out of Space, which is an entirely different genre, made 4 decades later, I do believe, starring the greatest actor alive, Nicolas Cage, and also going to tie into an entry for a type of lich that I came across that was not published at the time I started going with the Ladyhawke idea. It actually came out like very shortly afterwards as an update to one of the other books. So because of that, I think I have a solid idea of how to take one aspect of the Ladyhawke idea that I wasn't sure what I was going to use it for, and have an idea as to how to connect it using other parts that are going to massage it more into the D&D setting, because it's in the Forgotten Realms at the moment, as to how to make it all work out better. So that's something you should look out for. Like I said, that comes back to basically the parts I've been saying. Pay attention to the movie plots you're watching, look at the monster manual, novel ideas, both from novels and ideas that are themselves novel. If you're going to copy movies, try to stick with ones that your players have probably not seen, if you can at all, if you want to surprise them. Or, here's the other main bit of advice, is you have to learn how to adapt them. Because very few ideas are just going to just plug straight in. You might get lucky, which should basically be like adapting Lord of the Rings, or something like that, where you're just like, I'm just going to take this fantasy subplot right over here and I'm just going to plug it straight in. You can do that, maybe, if you get really lucky, but odds are you're going to have to actually adapt it somehow. Which is why you want to look beyond the obvious movies. Don't just look at every medieval fantasy movie ever made. I mean, first of all, look at just other medieval movies, because the politics and the setting is still the same. You just have to add magic to make it make sense in Dungeons and Dragons. Like Robin Hood, for instance. Everything there works for Dungeons and Dragons. You just have to throw in some magic and some razzle-dazzle and make it less focused on Robin specifically, and maybe focused on, the Merry Men in their entirety instead. Unless your players are cool with one of your characters basically stealing the ship, in which case they're Robin. Everyone else is playing a ranger. Because, the Merry Men. But no, that's where you want to mix it up. Like Friar Tuck would go from being a friar to for a cleric for a specific god, and you'd have to figure out, like, if it's going to be in the Forgotten Realms, where you're going to set it. What war was Robin off fighting in that he's got to come back. If you're going specifically for, like, the Kevin Costner Prince of Thieves adaptation, the Morgan Freeman character would probably be a paladin of a different god, not known in that area, who comes back with him. Things like that. That's how you got to adapt it to what you're going with, and then you can run with it. I mean, in fact, that one you might even be able to slip in there, and people might not even notice that you're basically playing through the story of Robin Hood, because they're not going to think of that. So, anyway, those are the general ideas that I would say you should go with. The only other thing I can think of would be to try to keep notes if you come across a good idea, so you don't forget. Obviously, I don't expect everyone to just walk around with a pen and a piece of paper. Fortunately, your phone can keep notes quite well. So definitely just make a little note in there somewhere. And who knows, maybe you'll make part of a note that later on you'll wonder what the hell it is, and that'll lead you to some other idea entirely that'll be great. So that's the broad advice. Video number 2 is going to be some more specific examples to try to drive home the point of what I'm getting at here. So thank you for watching. Adios.